Welcome to the Dwayne Kerrigan podcast, and I'm your host, Dwayne Kerrigan. With 35 years in business and close to 30 ventures across 12 industries, I've seen a lot. Amid the celebrity allure of entrepreneurship, many exceptional entrepreneurs remain shadowed. Here, I team up with these hidden talents to unveil their challenges and successes. Dive in with me to unearth entrepreneurial gems, learn from our experiences, and get educated. Hey everybody, thanks very much for tuning in. This is the second conversation with my interview with Rich Diviney, who wrote the book Masters of Uncertainty, ex-Navy SEAL, great friend of mine. Guys, if you haven't heard the first one, go back, take a listen to it, but tune in and get back to this one. Like, this is a masterclass. It is such a great book. And as I said in the first episode, and honestly, like, this is a book that everybody should have. It's like literally a handbook, and he actually goes through how to execute and shares more stories that I thought was really, really powerful. So, you know, get on this podcast, listen to it. But if you haven't heard the first version, go back to the to last week and listen to that episode. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We will have a great week, and we'll see you soon.
Let me, if I could, get into the moving horizons concept, because one of the things Huberman and I did discover was that the cold plunge is actually one of the best ways to practice moving horizons, and it's actually something you described. All right, moving horizons. So we talked about buying down anxiety. Okay, that's one factor that's one of the fear equations or factors in the equation. Now let's talk about buying down uncertainty. Okay, buying down uncertainty we do through a process called moving horizons, which I talk about in the book. All this is well, first we have to understand that our brains in any environment are trying to gain certainty about that environment. That's what our brains are constantly trying to do, gain certainty about our environment. The brain does so through several factors, but the main three factors are what we call duration, pathway, outcome. Duration is how long this is going to last, or is this going to last? How long is this going to last? Pathway, what's my route in, out, or through? And then outcome, what's the end state to all this? You know, if we are in absence of one or more of those factors, we begin to feel uncertainty and anxiety and stress and things like that. Our autonomic arousal goes up. So we'll just take a simple example of illness. Okay, we all know strep throat is an illness. Okay, and we all know that there's an antibiotic you can take for strep throat, and we all know that people don't typically die from strep throat. So if one of us gets strep throat, we are in absence of only one of the three factors. We know the pathway, that's the antibiotic, and we know the outcome, we're going to get better. What we don't know necessarily is the duration, because you may respond to antibiotics differently than I do. So it might take you a day to get over it. It might take me 3 days. Okay, so we're in absence of just one. So our uncertainty anxiety level is low, it's mild. Okay, now let's take the flu. Okay, the flu is an illness we all know of. We also know nowadays, at least in modern society, people typically don't die from the flu. We get over it. Okay, but there's no known thing you can take for the flu. There's no known antibiotic or cure. I mean, a lot of people have ideas, do this, do that, they're swear by, but officially there's nothing that we know in fact works every time. And we also don't know how long we're going to have the flu. Okay, so in that case, we're in absence of two of the three. We're in absence of duration and pathway, but we know outcome. We know we're going to get better. We just don't know the other two. So our anxiety uncertainty level is at moderate level. Now let's imagine that a disease shows up on the planet, and there's no known cure. We've never seen it before. There's no known cure or vaccine. There are some people who are dying from it. There are other people who are not dying from it. And we don't know how long this is going to kind of rage through our society. All right. Welcome 2020. This was what we felt in COVID. We were in absence of all three of these factors. This is why all of us felt some level of uncertainty, anxiety, and stress, because we didn't know the duration, pathway, or outcome for COVID. That's when our anxiety and uncertainty level is at its max. Okay. What moving horizons allows us to do is it allows us to make certain aspects of our environments when the environment holistically is uncertain. It's about picking something to focus on, and in essence, creating our own DPO, creating our own duration, pathway, outcome. So an example would be SEAL training. And Navy SEAL training, you know, as you know, because you know enough about the training, is that you spend hundreds of hours running around with heavy boats on your head. Okay, you do this constantly, especially during Hell Week. You don't go anywhere without those boats. And I remember it was 3 a.m. We were running with this damn boat. We'd been running with it for hours. We're on the beach. There's a sand berm that was next to us that we were running next to. And I remember in my misery, I said to myself, you know what? I'm just going to focus on getting to the end of this sand berm. And what I did without kind of knowing that I did it is I picked a horizon, and in doing so, I created my own duration pathway outcome. I created duration from now until end of sandberm, pathway from here to end of sandberm, and then outcome end of sandberm. And by doing that and executing that horizon, executing that DPO, when I hit the end of the sandworm, I got a dopamine reward for that because I set a small goal, which I just rewarded myself for. And then was able to come back out and ask the question again. Now, what do I focus on? What do I control? Pick another horizon and do that. All right. And we can go through this cycle of asking what we know control, picking a horizon, creating a DPO, executing DPO, and then in that accomplishment and that dopamine reward, repeating the cycle. Okay. And we can do that over and over and over again until one of three things happens. Either we accomplish the overall goal, okay. Number two, we move through the uncertainty, challenge, or fear. Or three, we've created enough certainty in our environment that there's no uncertainty left anymore. Because presumably every time we pick a horizon and we move, we've actually opened up the certainty optic to some degree. But we can do this over and over again. And what we have to understand is that our horizons, they're subjective to us and our experience, and more specifically, the intensity of the environment we're in. So in other words, I remember being freezing in the surf zone and getting surf tortured. And I remember saying to myself, I'm going to count 5 waves. That's what I'm focused on. You're right. Sometimes my horizon was I'm going to make it to the next meal. Sometimes my horizon was I'm going to run to the end of sandberm. But by moving horizons, we're making certain, we're gaining certainty, we're creating certainty by picking a DPO and executing that DPO. The reason why the cold plunge is so great, and Huberman and I actually, when we were first doing this, we were kind of saying, hey, we should take this, we should do workshops, and we should bring cold plunges to the workshop and make people do this to practice this technique. Because as you can testify, every single time you're about to get in that ice bath, you don't want to get in the ice bath. I dread it every time. And I was a Navy SEAL, for God's sakes. And every time I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to do this because it's painful. It's hard. Okay. And so getting in there, and both Kristen and my son wanted to try this the first time. This was years ago. And I said, okay, when you get into this ice bath, as soon as you get in, I want you to stare at my hand and count to 10. And essentially what I did is I created their first horizon. I said, okay, once you count to 10, pick another point somewhere and pick a number and count to that. And they just began to just map their create horizon after horizon. Both of them got through a minute and a half their very first time, okay, in 33-degree water. So it's a great way to practice because every time it's hard. It's not like you get used to it. You know, it hurts every time. But it's a really incredible environment inside of which to practice this stuff.
Yeah, might I add that 33 degrees is a lot different than 50 degrees. I mean, I've done 33 many times, and it is completely different. There's no question about it. But it's funny that you say this because I'm reflecting on my own experience. And when I jump into the cold plunge, like I go down and I've got a pattern now, 30 seconds, then I dunk. I stay down. I used to stay down for 30 seconds and then I would come back up. And then, I shouldn't say, I do a slow count to 10. Then I would come up and then I'd go back down a minute later. And in total, it took 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And then now with this breathing, I stay down for over a minute now. And now as you're describing it, and even after reading the book, actually, so thank you so much for the description, because even after reading the book, I have a better understanding of the DPO. So it's very, very, very helpful. But when you talk about moving horizons, and one of the things that I had questioned as we've been talking is how do we, I tried to do this with my son when he was younger, to create environments that would be stretch goals, if you will, like stretch him out. And it started when he was a baby, actually. I'd try to get him into the hands of as many people as possible. And back then I was heavily in the restaurant industry. So I would walk in and drop him on the table in the back, and everybody would just take turns kind of passing him around for a few hours while I worked, which was great from the perspective for me being able to work. But one of the intentions was I wanted him to feel comfortable with a whole bunch of people. And we just kind of kept growing that with him over the years. And now the kid can talk to anybody. Like it's incredible. He just walks in, look, he used to have to look people in the eye, that's typically uncomfortable for a lot of people. And so I'm curious, what would you recommend to parents who want to help their children, unbeknownst to them, to progress in moving these horizons?
Yeah, well, what I've done with my boys, and of course they have to be old enough to understand what I'm telling them to do. But I just tell them. I mean, there have been situations where our other son comes in and they're kind of freaking out. I say, okay, stop. Let's just first you can take a couple breaths. So by the way, breath or breathing can be in itself its own horizon. You can say, I'm going to take 10 breaths right now, and that's a horizon. Okay, so bringing down that anxiety through breathing can be your first horizon. Okay, so the first thing is help them calm themselves, and then say, okay, stop. What do you know, and what can we control? What can we focus on right now? Give them the prompt to pick their horizon, and then coach them a little bit on proper horizon picking. In other words, what's a meaningful horizon for that person? Because every person is going to find a different that distance of the horizons will be different for everybody based on their own subjective input. And the reason why that is because when we pick a horizon, what we're doing is we're managing our dopamine system internally. Dopamine, as many people know, it's been known as a reward chemical, which it is to some degree, but it's mostly a motivation chemical. Dopamine is actually what allows us to get up out of bed in the morning. They've done the experiment with rats, with rats where they had a rat or a couple of rats next to a kind of a device where they pushed a lever and a tasty pellet would come out and they could eat the pellet. And of course, the rats would just sit next to the machine and push that thing and just get pellet after pellet after pellet. But then they took the rats or a couple of the rats and they removed the dopamine from their system. They have ways they can do that, and they put the rat just basically a rat's length away from that lever, and the rats wouldn't even move. They wouldn't even move to go press that lever. In fact, they would sit there and starve before they actually did anything. When we have no dopamine, we don't have any motivation to do anything. And when we pick a horizon, what we're doing is we're setting ourselves with a dopamine charge to allow us to get to what we've just set as a goal. It's in fact giving us the fuel to pursue that goal. Okay. Why does this matter? It matters because if we pick a horizon that's too far away from us, we are going to run out of dopamine before we get there. Okay. And when we run out of dopamine, we quit. Every time you've quit anything, it's because you've run out of dopamine. That's the reason why you quit. If we pick a horizon that's too short, we're not going to register enough of a reward to feel good about it and be encouraged to keep on going. Okay. And so why this matters is because we have to help people understand and kind of play with the distances of the horizons they pick. And the good news is you can do this in the moment. In other words, if you pick a horizon as you're moving towards it, you feel like you're gonna gas out, bring the horizon in and then try again. If you pick a horizon that's too close, too short, you're going to get there and be like, well, I didn't feel anything. Okay. So you pick something a little bit more distance. And so we can play with this and manipulate this in the moment. And what we're literally doing is manipulating our own personal dopamine reserve in these moments. And so I think encouraging people, even kids, to calm themselves to a degree that they can actually get that frontal lobe back online, and then ask them, okay, what do I know? What can we control? What should we focus on in this moment? What's a movement we can make? Pick a horizon. All right, get there. And our horizons should always be just outside our comfort zone, but not too hard. Okay. And that's that sweet spot we're looking for. And so I think that type of training for anybody allows them to start practicing the stuff. And the good news is you don't have to be in uncertainty to practice this. Most of us who lift weights or go to the gym or even run do this automatically when we're working out. We don't think about the whole workout when we start. We think about focusing on one thing at a time. Even on running, we do that. And that's a way to practice this stuff without uncertainty involved so that you can kind of get good at it. You can do this in the business world too, whether it's a presentation you're preparing or an email you're doing. You just pick something, focus on it, do it till completion, then come back out and pick something else and start playing with this horizon shifting, so that when you are in uncertainty next time and you literally you have that stress and that fear coming in, you can start to say, okay, what am I focusing on? Because honestly, what the power of this is if you do this effectively, you eliminate fear. And this is no kidding true. And people have asked me before, hey, were you ever in situations as a Navy SEAL and all the stuff you've done where you were really afraid? And I tell them with real honesty, not arrogance, no, I was not. And it's not because fear wasn't a factor. It's not because we were fearless. It's because in those moments, all we did was focus on what we know and what we could control. In gunfights, in jumping out of airplanes, it's about what we know and what we can control. A great example is some of the types of skydiving we do in the SEAL team is called HAHO, high altitude, high opening parachutes, right? This is an evolution where you go out, the plane would be at like 23,000 feet. You jump out. As soon as you jump out, you count to 4 and pull your parachute. So you're opening up around 20,000 feet, and you're going to fly your parachute in the jet stream to a drop zone way off in the distance, land at that drop zone, and then from there, probably start your patrol, do a mission. Right, a huge evolution. And I remember this was probably a few months ago. I was with some team guy friends of mine. We'd all served together. We're all retired now. And we were having lunch and just, yapping and joking. And I remember we were talking about a particular mission or evolution where it was a hey-ho operation. So we're going to jump out at 20,000 feet. We're going to fly to this unknown drop zone, which an unknown DZ, for everybody who doesn't know, is just it's a drop zone that we have not been able to actually put eyes on. So it's the reconnaissance guys will look at some imagery and say that area looks clear. Let's land there. But we don't know if there's like boulders or something. We're gonna go there and figure it out. Okay.
Right.
So it's a hey-ho mission, unknown DZ, patrol into a target, massive target, and then execute this mission. Obviously done at night, tons of gear, oxygen, night vision, all that stuff. You're basically waddling out of that aircraft at 20,000 feet. Okay. And I remember we were talking as a group, and one of my buddies says, "You know what's funny? When that ramp opens up, there's only one thing I'm thinking." And we're like, "What?" He's like, "Nail the exit." Because if you don't get out of that airplane in a stable position, your parachute's not going to open properly. And then you have a whole host of other problems. So the only thing, and we're all like, exactly, the only thing any of us are thinking, we're not thinking about all this stuff that's in front of us. The only thing any of us are thinking is nail the exit. Okay. And I'll tell you, as someone who is scared of heights, who doesn't like, I love flying, by the way, but jumping out of airplanes was always an issue. I didn't have fear because I was so focused on that thing. Just nail the exit, nail the exit, nail the exit. Once I nailed the exit, pull my parachute. Okay. Once I pull my parachute, that's open, get on heading. Once I'm on heading, do this, do that. I'm just stepping through it slow, methodically. I didn't feel fear. And in fact, I joke that there were times where we'd come back from missions and looking back on what we'd just done, I was more afraid than I was in the moment. I'm like, holy shit, that was a close one, right? I almost get anxious. I'd almost feel that physiological response after the fact, right? But it really does. It takes away the fear. And even I saw Buzz Aldrin interviewed recently, and the interviewer was saying, "Hey, when you were landing on the moon, I mean, all that stuff, were you afraid? Were you ever afraid?" He's like, honestly, I wasn't, because I was so focused on what I had to do. It's like, first I do this, then I do this. I was so in the moment, I didn't have time to be afraid. The fear was gone. And the reason is because you're buying down uncertainty. You're creating certainty. So there's no uncertainty, and you're not thinking about the future. There's no anxiety, which means there's no fear. You're just focused on the moment. That's the power of this stuff, is you can actually take away fear altogether if you get really good at it.
And on the other side, just out of curiosity, I have a couple of questions here, but on the other side of that, do you take away the fear, the emotion of fear, but do you also, on the flip side, risk taking away the emotion of the euphoria of, say, for example, Buzz Aldrin being on the moon going, holy shit.
Yeah. You absolutely risk that. So the euphoria must be oftentimes deliberately induced if you have a moment to do that. That's another thing. But I will say the power of being in the moment is that you can recognize what that moment is, and sometimes induce some appreciation for that moment. A good friend of mine, we had coffee again a few weeks ago, and he was telling me about a operation he was doing in Afghanistan one time, and this was an operation where they had to go into this valley area, big target, like some real bad guys there. And the problem was that the night they wanted to go was 100% illume, right, which is a full moon basically, and 100% illume at night is like, I mean, it's like being out there at broad daylight. And so yeah, so they were like, okay, this is not going to be good because they'll see us coming. It's just too bright out there. And when they dug into it, they get the intel folks and the weather folks, and they're like, hey, listen, there's going to be a window of opportunity where the moon sets, where you're going to have darkness. Okay, but it's only this short window. So what they recognize is they could patrol into a certain point, and they just have to sit there until the moon set, and then they'd move in and do the target. So that's what they did. So they went in, and they go into this area, and they get to the pause point. Okay, and they're at the pause point, and they have about 20 minutes or so to wait. And my buddy was like, it's funny, we were sitting there for 20 minutes, and we all just sit down, we just take a rest. And he said, I sat there and I started just looking around me and just recognizing the beauty of the environment I was in. It was just absolutely gorgeous. Mountains of Afghanistan, moonlight. I mean, just the stars, the picture perfectness of my environment. And I just sat there and I just took it in. I just took it in. And then the clock went. The clock chimed and they had to go in. And then 10 minutes later, they're in a huge gunfight. So you know, but it's a real testament to his ability, and in many cases most of our ability to, in the moment, say to yourselves, oh, wait a second, just pause for a second, I have a moment, I'm going to just enjoy this. I'm going to take this in. I remember, I don't like parachuting, but I remember on some of these jumps, I would pause for a second. You're at 19,000 feet and I'd look at my boots and I'd look at the distance between my boots and the ground. I'd be like, man, holy shit, that's actually pretty awesome. And just take it in for a second, right? And so yeah, you are at risk of not enjoying, and again, getting that euphoria. But again, one of the I will just say, one of the uh tendencies of SEALs, of guys like us, is because we're so cognizant of Murphy showing up at any moment. we very rarely celebrate. It's like, hey, good, great, move on, don't get complacent, right? It's just kind of thing. So celebrations can come usually after the fact, once we're back at the base and having a beer or whatever. But yeah, it's just you have to balance all of it. So
Yeah. Thanks for the story. It's awesome to hear, and it's so not relatable, but it helps put it all into perspective, and the breathing and the vision and all that kind of stuff. I have just one last question about this moving horizons, which is more towards people who are struggling from mental health. Like it just strikes me like this is the kind of thing that should be taught in schools.
yeah.
This is the kind of thing that we should be, opening up to our children. And not, I mean, forget about look, most of the people who are listening to this podcast are in some type of business or interested in personal growth or whatever it is. And, and so they'll intellectually get a lot of this conversation, but there are, these possibilities. And why are we not teaching this stuff? I mean, I'm making the assumption that this would help in mental health, mental illness is, I think sometimes a catch-all for a lot of things that, it could be avoided and not grow into such a stigma and just curious if you have any experience around that.
Yeah, well, I'll say, listen, this is why I want the book to sell millions and millions of copies, right? Because it's less financial and more just get in the hands of it as many people as possible. So I agree with you. When it comes to mental health, I also agree with you. However, I want to be humble enough to say that I'd rather get in the hands of psychologists and those folks who are actually in that space, professionals who can then help apply it to people who are really in need. Because I don't want to presume some of the factors that go into degraded mental health, and it may someone's mental health state may preclude them from being able to do this effectively, which means now we have to have psychologists involved and have them understand this. But I will say optimistically that yes, the simplicity of it is really very poignant, and there's no human on the planet. Every single one of the listeners right now can, if I were to ask them, can name me a time they've done this before. We all do this. This is the neurological equivalent of eating the elephant one bite at a time. And in some capacity in our lives, every single one of us has done this. And so it's a very human thing. And just recognizing those times where we've done it, again, being able to articulate it and explain it allows us to be able to practice it and do it over and over again and make it habitual. And all masters of uncertainty are, the only secret SEALs have is that we do this without thinking it. We do this without thinking. It's automatic. And I remember, my wife, I think I've told you this story before, but in where we live here in Virginia, in our neighborhood, across the street, there's a Navy SEAL. Down the road to the right, there's a Navy SEAL, and down the road to the left, there's a Navy SEAL, or at least used to be. He recently moved. But I remember my wife saying, I'm so glad these guys are here, because if something went wrong or if I needed someone, I could go to them and they'd act like you act. And I said, what do you mean by that? I said, because every time the shit hits the fan, all you guys do is you calm down, and you start working the problem. That's what you do. You just calm down, you start working piece after piece. And that's what we do. It's habitual for us. And so if you get this enough embodied, you will start doing it without thinking. And that's when you achieve mastery. And then, of course, it gives you that confidence that you'll do it every time, and gives you the confidence to now deliberately step into uncertainty. Writing a book, starting a business was completely new. I had no idea how to do it. But I did it. I wanted to step into it and try it, because this is I'm curious. I want to explore the potential. Even speaking in front of large crowds, I didn't like it. I didn't really wasn't something that excited me, and I just said, you know what, step in. This is a comfort zone. This is a horizon I want to start to explore, and that's what I did. And so it allows you to do that with confidence, and that's really powerful.
That's what I love about the book is you know people have a tendency to idolize or put up on a pedestal, people who have, whether it's in this example Navy SEALs and or business people who have attained certain skill sets and or results inside a business, and they think, oh, I couldn't do that. You can do that. You can do it. You can do it. There are simple practices and processes, and that's what I love about the book is you bringing forward, and I love the explanation that you're giving about this, because it just makes it so executable. But anybody who is listening to this conversation, I mean, you should go buy this book. This podcast is not over, but I'm telling you, you should buy this book. I am going to buy copies for every single manager and leader in my organizations. And because this is about exercising rituals in a practical way that can move you forward. And I think we talked about this a little earlier, which is, we talked about how the real world, works a little bit slower, but most people overestimate what they can accomplish in a year, and they underestimate what they can accomplish in a decade. And or take that from a week to a year type of thing. Like in the shorter term, we always think like, we can accomplish this, and this. And if you just start these rituals over time, it can just change your trajectory, and it'll change the trajectory of the people around you.
Yeah. Well, it allows us to mitigate the factor that prevents most people from doing most things. That's fear. And again, I say mitigate very, very precise, very deliberately, because we're not getting rid of our fear. We're actually working with our fear. Fear is a positive thing in our lives. Fear is nature's risk assessment tool. And I always, one of the best pieces of advice I was given by a former officer when I was a young JO was, Rich, beware the fearless leader, because that person's going to get you killed. If I saw fearlessness on the team, I would rout it out, because fearlessness means complacency. Fearlessness means you're not listening to those factors that your body's telling you, hey, pay attention. There's something here. There's a threat. So this is not about getting rid of fear. This is about mitigating it and working with it so that we effectively move with it. Understand it's a risk assessment tool. Pay attention to it, but now you have the tools and techniques and the processes to move along with it and use it effectively.
Yeah, thank you, because that's I think a critical piece, right? It's like you courage is moving forward in spite of fear.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Stupidity is moving forward.
Complacency. Yeah.
Not paying attention to it. So, we've talked about soft gaze. There were some things that I really wanted people to get from your explanation on this. Can we spend some time on outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What I was going to say this earlier, but that the third portion of the book, like you break it out, I think it was 9 chapters, right?
Yeah, 9 chapters. Yeah.
And the third portion I thought was like a complete, as I'm reading the book, was a complete bonus section. Like on like it really hit me like, holy shit, this is perfect. Like how you talk about implementing it into teams and everything that you've kind of come up with. So I'd love to spend some time, if we don't mind. And I know I'm taking up your time here, but I'm so grateful for it. But it's one thing for people in business, especially entrepreneurs, because they're self-driven and they're, and they're compelling and they're moving forward, and, they're doing things in spite of the odds. And, let's face it, if you're going to be an entrepreneur, like you got to be a little bit crazy. You're not doing it necessarily for the money. You're doing it, for the love of it and the passion and so, but I think sometimes the transition of building teams and getting teams to the point where they can execute is very difficult for some entrepreneurs. and and then a lot of times when the organization grows, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to find help, an entrepreneurial, a manager, leader, so there's, the vision, the manager, leader, the entrepreneurial leader. And so when you can sometimes be an entrepreneur, that doesn't mean that, you have to do everything. But as it comes to teams, like you talked about, there was outcomes, dynamic subordination, and then that whole piece about building trust and culture and whatnot. And so, I mean, dynamic subordination, I think is an excellent way to explain to people this new leadership style. And so, if you don't mind spending some time on that, and I'm happy to follow your lead.
Not at all. Yeah. So when it comes to teaming, I kind of break it down into three factors. You have your model, the frame, and the engine. Okay. And the model is really how do we task organize how do we set ourselves up in a way that high performing teams can actually manage and perform in uncertainty the best they can. Then we have the frame. What's the framework from which you can set up that model, and then what's the engine that drives the whole performance of the team? So model is centers around this concept of dynamic subordination. If you were to kind of think of a model or a diagram, it's instead of the pyramid that we all see, kind of the task organizational pyramid or the flat line or even the upside down servant leadership model. Dynamic subordination would be more like a blob or an amoeba, and all it says is that a team understands that challenges and issues and problems can come from any angle at any moment, and one does, the person who's closest to that problem and the most capable immediately steps up and takes lead, and then everybody follows, and the environment shifts, and someone else steps up and takes lead, and everybody follows. It's a dynamic swap between leader and follower. I also call it alpha hopping. Alpha hopping, that alpha position just hops to wherever it needs to be. This is how all high-performing teams operate. Listen, I was an officer in the SEAL teams. Okay, I went on hundreds of combat missions. I was in charge of every single one. It did not mean I was always being supported. In fact, most of the time it was opposite. I was supporting other people, whether it was snipers or breachers or assaulters. Sometimes the environment would shift and they'd be in support of me. But all this tells us is that our responsibility on a team has nothing to do with our hierarchy or our rank. It has everything to do with what we are there to contribute to the team. And the team basically moves and shapes itself based on the environment. A real easy way to explain this or visualize it would be the commercial airliner. The commercial airliner, that airplane, everybody agrees and has no problem with the fact that the captain is in charge of that aircraft. Everybody's good with that. However, if that captain is taxiing that aircraft out and gets a call from the maintenance person, and the maintenance person says, "Hey, I just found a problem with your aircraft. You need to turn around." No captain worth their wings is going to ignore that call. They are going to immediately subordinate to the maintenance person and turn that aircraft around and go back to the gate. And then they realize they have to deplane the aircraft. Okay, well, the captain doesn't step up and take charge of that either. Now the flight attendant steps up and takes charge. Okay, so this is a very simple way to think of dynamic subordination. It's a constant step up, step back. It's our job as leaders to create that environment because we're creating that model environment. One of the ways we create that environment is by the way we frame it. The frame, which is trust. Trust is enormously important. The things you have to understand about teammates or to create the dynamic subordination environment is trust and transparency. So in other words, attributes. What do we know? Are we wearing our strengths and our weaknesses on our sleeves? So what do we know about each other? And then are we building trusting environments so that we all understand when we step up and step back, and we can trust that it will happen. In the book, I talk about the four components of trust, which are competence, consistency, character, and compassion. And I break down those four elements in the sense that, hey, if you focus on building trust inside of each of these four elements, you get a very long-lasting, durable trust. And so you create that environment where people now trust each other and move rapidly. And then finally, culture. Culture is really the engine and the culture really, I mean, from a teaming standpoint, this is identity. It's basically a team identity is the culture. And why it's important is because if we're not as leaders explicit about what the culture is, in other words, what does it mean to be part of this team? What's the identity we carry? If we're not explicit about that, the team is going to figure it out on its own. They're going to come up with their own culture, and you may or may not like what the result is. Okay, so it's important that we're explicit about that. I talk about a technique I use in the teams of just creating I am statements that defined what it meant to behave. What are the behaviors that it looks like to be part of this identity. I mean, the Girl Scouts, I highlight the Girl Scouts in the book. Girl Scouts do this all the time. They have the Girl Scout code, and the Girl Scout code is simply a series of statements that define what it means, what it looks like to be a Girl Scout. That is universal to all Girl Scouts. Every single Girl Scout knows the Girl Scout code, and they behave towards those behaviors to embody that identity. We can do the same thing within our teams. We just have to be deliberate about it, and oftentimes we should get the input of the team members to extent, especially if it's an older team. But because you don't want it just coming from one person. One of the mistakes that, quite honestly, I made was when I brought this into a team I was in command of. I created those I am statements. I did get some feedback from the team leads and the troop chiefs, and we used it. What I should have done about 3 months in was come back and get the whole team involved and say, okay, does this still make sense for us? Do these I am statements still make sense for us as a team? Because then the team owns it. It's not just something I built. Okay. And if it's just something one person built, it's not going to last. It's not going to last longer than that person. Had I done that, it would have lasted longer than me. And so you just learned these lessons. But this identity should be an identity, a culture for the organization, for the team. And now you have very, very deliberate, distinct behaviors that go along with what it means to be part of this team. It helps with performance evaluation. It helps with helping people keep on track, because there's no question about it. There's no question. People can say, hey, this is my behavior was supporting me being on this team. It was in alignment with the team culture, or was out of alignment. It's that simple. Okay. And you can have very simple, quick conversations about that. So
if you don't mind me just going back to the trust piece. There was the 4 C's, I think, competence, consistency, character, and compassion. Can I get those? So in regards to, obviously there's a training component when it comes to competence. Your experience with all the organizations that you've worked and worked with, and being in the SEALs and all that kind of stuff, is where do you see that fall short? What are the kind of things that happen? And then the other part to that question would be, what can people do to enhance the competency inside their organization right now?
Yeah, the thing about competency, and it's actually the easiest one of the three, and it's in fact the one that most businesses focus on the most, and that can be a problem because it's actually it's fragile. If it's the only thing you're focusing on, it's fragile. In fact, organizations and teams typically focus on competence and consistency, because those are often skills based. They're measurable. They're you can see how well anybody does any one of them. But if you ignore the other two, you actually ignore a really important two more important components: character and compassion. So just to break out, competence is do the thing right. That's all that is. Consistency is do the thing right over time. Character is do the right thing. And then compassion is do the right thing for me because you care about me as a human being. Okay. You can build a trusting environment, or can begin building a trusting environment in any one of those 4 elements, but it's only when you have all 4 that you have the longest lasting, most durable trust. And so the example I'll give you is this. Imagine you and I were together and we decide to go out and have some dinner and drinks. Okay. We have a great time. We don't want to drive home. So we call a cab. We hop in the cab, and the cab within 50 meters runs into a telephone pole. Okay. Now, no big deal. We're not injured. We get out, we find our way home. Not a big deal. But imagine then a couple nights later, you and I are out again. And we have some dinner, have some drinks. And again, we decide we're not going to drive home. So we call a cab. When the cab shows up, it's the same driver from the night before. Okay. Are we going to get back in the car with that driver is the question. And the answer is,
we decide to drive home.
The answer is no, we're not going to, right? You know, now rewind that whole scenario. Okay. You and I are out, we're having drinks. Okay. We decide we don't want to drive home, but we don't call a cab. We call our wives, our best friends, our brother, our sister, whoever that is. That person shows up. We get in the car with that person, and that person runs into a telephone pole within 50 meters. A few days later, are we going to get back in the car with that person? Okay. Now, most of us would say yes. I've had some people say, no, I'm still not getting back in the car. But most of us would say yes. And that's because with that second person, we had all 4 elements. With that first person, we only had the first 2. We had the consistency of the cab company and the perceived competence of the driver. As soon as competence took a hit, trust went away. All right. With that second person, when competence took a hit, we had other things to fall back on. So competence is important and actually quite easy. Just train in the skill. Okay. That's how we do competence. but it's really focusing on the other factors, especially character and compassion, that will build a very long lasting, durable trust. Because if something fails or takes a hit, we have stuff to fall back on. In fact, it's the other two that when those take a hit, that are actually harder to recover from. When compassion takes a hit or character takes a hit, those are harder to recover from than competence and consistency. Competence and consistency with the other two are easier to recover from. But when someone fails to care about you or shows an example of them not caring about you, man, that's a tough blow. It really is. And so those other two, the character and compassion, are actually more important to work on. A, because we typically ignore them in business environments, and B, they create a very powerful baseline of trust that buttresses failures in competence and failures in consistency in a much more meaningful way.
Yeah, I really am grateful that you kind of talked about the first two and put them in a skill-based kind of context. On the other two, and I look for anybody who's listening to this, it's like, you can measure whether or not your people are competent and whether they're consistent enough. And you can also you should be able to measure whether or not that needs to be increased inside your organization. Training needs to become more diverse, needs to be more widespread, but on the character and compassion side, I think there are some owners in business that they don't want to delve into that, because that becomes that they don't know how to gauge it. They don't know how to train it. They don't know how to coach it. They don't know how to measure it, because skills are easier. And on the character and compassion side, what tips would you give people to start, moving the culture of your organization to, bringing that into the fold?
Yeah, well, it's I'm glad you asked, because it's all about behavior. It's all about how we behave. So trust is a reciprocal act. In other words, we go first in these trust behaviors so that someone makes a decision. Trust is a belief, by the way. It's feeling. Some people say trust is a feeling. A feeling is just a human emotion. That's all it is. A belief is a human emotion that's been rationalized or justified by that human being. It doesn't even matter if it's right or wrong. It just matters that it has been. So it tells us something very simple that we all have to remember. And that is, we can't make anybody trust us. All we can do is behave in a way that allows them to make a decision to form a belief of trust with us. Okay, so it's all about how we behave, and there are specific behaviors that you can engage in on these specific elements. If you want to build an environment of compassion, one of the things you can do is you can listen to people, but not just listen, like empathetically listen, like wipe all the thoughts out of your head as you're listening, fully engage. I'm really hearing you. You can have empathy, or at least attempt to have empathy. If you even attempt to put someone else or get into someone else's shoes, they will feel cared for. They really will. You can recognize and celebrate people. You can say thank you once in a while. I mean, there's so many ways you can show a human being that you care about them and build that environment of compassion. And then, of course, as leaders, we have to go first in all of this. We have to model the behavior we want to see more of, and then reward the behavior you want to see more of. Okay, so if we want more empathy in our teams, we have to start just display empathy, and then we have to reward empathy when we see it. Okay, that's how we build compassion. How to build character? Well, do the right thing. Be honest. Tell the truth. These are all ways. I mean, behave in a way that's aligned with the culture that you've created. Because if you behave out of alignment with the culture, you're not building an environment of character. Character is a big word. If I were to break it down, it's integrity. Do the right thing. Okay. If you're not behaving as the leader in alignment with the culture you're reporting exists, you're not going to have an environment of character. No one's going to trust you because you don't have character. So we can behave that way. And then consistency and competence are easy. Consistency, show up in a predictable manner, perform in a predictable way. I mean, consistency matters in the trust equation, in any trust equation. If you and I push our brakes and our brakes only work 50% of the time, we're not going to trust our brakes. Okay, so that repetitive action matters. And then competence, do the job right, be efficient, pursuit of mastery. All these ways we can behave in a way that inculcates these elements. Good news is, quick plug, is we actually have a trust assessment as well. And you can give this trust assessment to your team. They can fill it out anonymously along all four of these elements, and you can get a trust grade for each one of these elements. based on the feedback. So you can see exactly how you're doing in your teams by doing this, because, and it's a short assessment. The attributes assessment, admittedly, is a longer one, but the trust element is only the trust assessment is only 20 questions. You send it out, they fill it out anonymously, it comes back, you get a grade for what each of those elements are, and you can see exactly based on the questions which questions performed well and which questions you didn't perform well on. So you actually have specific talking points that you can start to now engage with your team and say, oh, wait a second, it looks like we're not doing as well in this compassion thing based on this and this. Let's have a conversation. Let's focus on that. Let's change our behavior. And so it just takes effort. All of this takes effort. We know it does. You and I have been married for a long time. Marriage, as wonderful as it is, and as easy as some people think it is, when they see people like us who've been married for a long time, it's not easy. We put in the work. We put in the work. We have the hard conversations. We have the arguments. We effectively argue. We effectively work this out together. These are relationships. It's the work. It's the hard work of leadership, and that's the work we need to do.
Yeah, it's funny. Anytime we get asked the question, like, what do you guys do? And like our whole vision in our relationship is to be an example for others just by them seeing us. So I don't want to tell people how to act in their relationship. Who am I to, everybody's different and all that kind of stuff. We just want to show up as an example of what true love can look like within our own relationship. Yeah. And people often will say, like, man, how do you have such a great relationship? I'm like, well, how many books have you read on relationships? And most people say like 1 to 0, 0 to 1 or 0 to 2 books in their lifetime that they've read in relationships. And it's like, well, I mean, if you want it to be there, you've got to study it. You got to ritualize it. And so as you were talking about, the character and compassion side, and I didn't know you had a trust assessment, so that's my bad. I apologize.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
Where can people find that? Is that
same place? The website.
Attributes.com.
The attributes.com. Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm going to be on that tonight because I didn't know you had it. So I will 100% be on it tonight. But the other piece was like, I couldn't help but think, and I was thinking this when I was reading the book, and maybe I'll use my own example, and you can poke holes in it, and to help, maybe it'll help people understand this just a little bit more. Which is, we have 4 culture principles in our organization: pursue excellence, be part of the solution, show others you care, and train. So those are the 4 kind of culture principles that we have. But as you were talking, as I was reading, and then as you had mentioned it again, like, having these values in place for your organization, but being specific. As I was reading the book, I was like, are specific enough? And we definitely don't have I am statements in that. And so if you were to take even just one of them, I don't need you to take all of them, but if you were to take one of those and maybe give an example to the audience that's listening as to how they would do that with their own business on their own culture principles.
Yeah. Well, I would say just listen to yours. So you had one, can you say your 4 again for me?
Pursue excellence. Be part of the solution. Show others you care, and train.
Okay. So be part of the solution is a great example of, that's a behavior. It's very explicit, and it can be used in terms of someone knows what to do with that. Now, I would encourage you to maybe specify what are some other behaviors that that may exemplify that particular one. But let's take the first one, pursue excellence. Unfortunately, that is a little bit vague, because pursue excellence might mean one thing for one person and a different thing. So what I would encourage you to do is say, what does pursue excellence look like at your organization? What are those behaviors that define pursue excellence? Because once you break it down into behaviors, now you're onto something. Now you have tangible things that people can actually attach to and link to. You can performance evaluate against those behaviors. There's so much you can do by saying that gets into those identities. Like, what does it look like? What does pursue excellence look like, for us here at this organization, and do that. And I think you could do the same thing with the third one, which is what was the third one again?
Show others you care.
Show others you care. What does that look like at your organization? What are some examples of that expressed at your organization? I'm sure you have tons. Okay. These can be even mini stories. Okay. Mini stories about people showing others that they cared, that is now highlighted for folks to understand what this looks like. Because again, values are great. Your values actually aren't really, they're actually pretty good. The worst ones are when it says a value is excellence. Just one word. It's like, what am I supposed to do with that, right? They have sometimes one word values. Like, I don't, cool. I just don't know what to do with that. So yours are on the way to that. I would just say be more explicit and query the people in the organization. You have people in the organization who've been with you for a while, and you have people who are new to the organization, and have them help you come up with that. You don't have to do it yourself. In fact, you shouldn't do it yourself, because you don't have eyes and ears everywhere. Have the team help you come up with those. And now you have from there, you have a bunch of stuff you can do in terms of helping define performance. From there, you can grab attributes. You can start to identify what attributes become most important based on those behaviors. So there's so much you can do if you just get a little bit more precise with this stuff, that allow for a common language, common picture, common operating picture is what we call it in the military, COP, common operating picture, from which everybody can now have guidance. And they, guess what? They have guidance even when you're not there, because it's all, and that becomes the culture, by the way. So that's what I would encourage.
Yeah, and that's how these started, right? When I was traveling 50% of the year, we had to have some type of. It actually started with our son. We had to have some type of framework. It's like, these is how you formulate. These are the considerations that you formulate your decisions on, and they worked really well when we had to rewind a problem that might have occurred while we were gone. It was like, okay, you know share with me how you were pursuing excellence. Share with me how you're being part of the solution. Show me how you were showing others you cared. At the time, we only had the three, and we added the train later on when we brought it into the business, actually. So, COP stood for common
Operating picture. Common
picture.
operating picture. Yeah, you'll
Yeah.
hear that in military speak, or even police speak.
And so, specifically, how would you, if somebody was going to go to your website, grab the attributes tool, and then start to look at the three pieces that I wrote down on in terms of them looking, and us too looking at our company values, which is what are those behaviors? What are the behaviors behind those? I love that. What are the hero, call it the hero stories on it, because that really, once you write a hero story, it's going to be pretty obvious what the behaviors are inside
Oh
of it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then and ask the team leaders and the team themselves. But how would you then link that up to the attributes?
Yeah, that's that. So we have a process that we help organizations and teams do that. But the kind of the simple answer is, once you look at a behavior, if you have a good understanding of the attributes, then you can start to understand, or ask yourself very honestly and get good answers about, okay, what attributes are required for this behavior? What's maybe the one or two top attributes that are required for this behavior? And you begin to put together that list, and what it starts to show you is again a common picture of what attributes start to show up more often than other ones, and it gives you a sense of how you prioritize the attributes in your culture as well. Or in any job position, one of the things we do is we help organizations understand, okay, what attributes are required for specific roles, because that allows them to then performance evaluate, but also hire for that role much more effectively. Now, they're not going to hire based on just a resume. They're going to now hire based on attributes that they've determined. So yeah, the behaviors, if properly queried, and again, it requires a good understanding, a proper understanding of the attributes themselves and the definitions and what they mean, because they're all very distinct in how they're defined. But you can certainly start putting attributes to these behaviors. So.
Holy smokes, buddy! We just gave a master class. You just gave, and you gave people a lot of homework.
Yeah.
I don't need to end this podcast, but I definitely want to be, understanding of your time, but if you were to kind of put a bow on this, or what would be the one thing that you feel like you haven't shared with us that people need or might want?
Well, I would say, I mean, I guess I've kind of shared. If I were to just kind of put a bow on it, I'd say, listen, the success for us as human beings, and not just success in terms of the measurable stuff like financial and professional and things like that, and even familial success in terms of our ability as human beings to use life to explore our potential. I think that's really the success of life, is we if we have had the opportunity to explore all of the wonderful things that this life offers us, and we're not limited or held back by fear. Um, this is what I hope for everyone. My hope is that everyone can build an identity of master of uncertainty. They can say, I am a master of uncertainty, because this is where I'm really driven by helping people explore their potential. And I think it's part of it is just from my experience seeing so many different parts of the world and seeing so many people who, just because of their circumstances, won't ever have the chance to explore their potential because they're so locked into just survival. Okay, those of us in the U.S. and in the first world countries, we have the gift and the opportunity to pursue things that others don't, because our basic needs are taken care of. We don't have to worry about surviving every day. It would be, in my mind, squandering that gift if we're not, in fact, exploring our potential and seeing what we could do, and in essence, how we can help others by what we can do. So that's my biggest message. This is stuff that allows you to be anybody who you want to be and explore aspects of yourself that you may not even know exists, because you now know how to use fear to your advantage and step through it. So that's the coolest thing for me.
I love that. It's success. Success use of use of life to explore your potential. That's
Yeah,
did I get that
yeah,
right?
I
Yeah.
think so. I just
What, did you just make that up?
well, it's always been on my mind. I just no one's asked me to verbalize it, so I'll have to. I think that's a good way to say it. We'll see if I get a better way, but that's pretty good. So
Yeah, I mean, I really actually love because when you hear the word success, that has so many different potentials based on where you are at in your life and, the age, the economic, situation but really that this is an exploration of potential. I love that saying. And we are so lucky. We get so tied up in political and economic and gender and racial conflicts, in our own head, and we stop thinking about the other areas in the world and how fortunate are we. And there's we take this for granted. I always say to people, like, travel the world and see what's out there.
yeah,
There's
yeah. That's,
we're
by the way, that's another thing we could do for our kids. We've been doing that, is get your kids out to see other people, the way other people live. It's amazing, and it's good for them to understand that there's so many different perspectives out there. And so, but yeah, listen, our potential is always in front of us. We actually never reach our potential. Our potential is always out there in front of us, which means we have unlimited potential because we can always be exploring it. But to explore it requires us stepping outside of our comfort zone. We have to, and that's what we should do.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Dude, thank you so much for your time. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are on the path, which you are on the path if you're listening to this podcast, you're a learner, you're looking for more, you're trying to grow. It Rich has some unbelievable tools that will help you on this path. And if you're the entrepreneur that's out there listening to this going, oh my God, this would be great, but I'm just too busy, then I think that's where, that first part of the trust process comes in, is find somebody that you can, delegate to making a level of competency in this sphere. Rich is a giving guy, and you can use his tools at whatever level you're at. I mean, we are personal friends, but I am not pitching. I got lots of personal friends that I'm not pitching their shit on my podcast. I have great respect, Rich, for you. I was thinking about this when you talked about your family identity, the husband identity, the father identity. Those are so solid within you. And I think probably it's the one thing I love most about you. And it's the one thing I respect most about you. So guys, attributes.com. Where else can they find you? Where can they follow you on social media? And
yeah, so it's just so everybody, it's theattributes.com. Theattributes.com. And then, social media on LinkedIn, Rich_Diviney, on Instagram, Rich Diviney on LinkedIn, our two social media. So follow me there, and check everything out. And again, I will highlight, if you are someone who's listening to this and saying you're too busy, then you have to get this book, because this book actually will tell you how you can actually do stuff if you're too busy. What are the ways to kind of start moving through that kind of environment in an effective way. If you want too busy, check out a SEAL mission when you're in a gunfight, and I'll show you too busy. You have to start to work.
But it's so true. Like, people who say they're too busy, oftentimes that is a result of you're shying away from uncertainty and you moving to certainty because you're busy, because you're the only guy that can do this, or the only girl that can do this. And if that whole story of, if you want something done, do it yourself bullshit. It's like that is not going to help you scale. It's not going to help you lead others. It's not going to help you leave a legacy, because, what we're doing here, and I don't mean me or Rich, but what we are all doing here are dropping pebbles in ponds and sending out ripples to the people around us, so that they get exposed. And so, Rich, I cannot thank you enough for your time and your commitment to this conversation. I know you have a lot of things going on, and you probably woke up this morning and went, shit, I got to talk to that guy today.
No, actually, the one reason why it's fine for me is because I get to talk to you. So it's always great for us visiting. I very much appreciate it. And I appreciate our friendship. So it's a big deal for me. So thank you.
Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate it. And also appreciate your friendship, and give my love to Kristen and the boys. Okay, buddy. Thanks so much. Guys, thanks for listening. Appreciate you. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you being with us. If you found value in the show and know a friend or coworker who could benefit from this conversation, please share the link via text or on social media. Remember, each share creates a ripple effect of knowledge and inspiration. And if this podcast has supported you in any way, please support us by clicking the follow or subscribe button. It helps us to improve the delivery of top quality content moving forward.
The views, information, or opinions expressed by guests during the Dwayne Kerrigan podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of Dwayne Kerrigan and his affiliates. Dwayne Kerrigan or the Dwayne Kerrigan podcast is not responsible for and does not verify the accuracy of any of the information contained in the podcast series. The primary purpose of this podcast is to educate and inform. Listeners are advised to consult with a qualified professional or specialist before making any decisions based on the content of this podcast.